What up? My name is MC Cubed. I thought about waiting to make this video until I got better at animation or until I at least had more popularity, but this has been on my mind for the past couple of days, so I decided, might as well do it right now. That being said, you know something that's intrigued me since I was younger? Dialects. I don't know why, but I've become incredibly drawn to the concept of having different versions of the same language, especially after not understanding it as a kid. When I was younger, I had read the word color being spelled with the letter U, and I couldn't understand why for the life of me. I always thought, that's a weird way to spell it. The word is color, not color. Also, when I was younger, I spelled theater with the R and E swap because that's what I was used to seeing at certain theaters as well as other places. Then I grew out of it and wondered, why do people spell it by ending it with RE? The word is theater, not theatre. It wasn't until I grew up a bit that I realized that other places have different forms of English. Makes sense. English is the third most spoken language in the world behind Chinese and Spanish. Of course, it'd be at least a little bit different depending on where you go. But American English dominates by far. And if you don't believe me, it says so right here, since the 20th century. I had gotten to a debate with European friends, they're not from the UK, and they said that there's no way that could be the case because the British colonized a lot of places, but I rebutted that argument with the fact that the US has other means of influence as opposed to colonization, such as business, government, and entertainment. But more on that later. Anyways, as I said earlier, English is spoken all across the globe, but the biggest places where English is spoken is the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Ireland, and New Zealand. All of these countries make up what is called the Anglosphere. There are other places too, like Guyana and Jamaica, but I'm focusing on these 6 because these places are known as the inner circle of English speakers. I know Ireland isn't often grouped in with the other 5, even Anglosphere-wise, as the other 5 are way closer to each other in more ways than one, but I'm including it because, as I said, it's often viewed as one of the most notable places where the English language dominates. Now, when it comes to these 6 countries, people often zone in on the first 4, if not outright the first 2. This chart that I found on Wikipedia doesn't include Ireland and New Zealand, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ireland is right by Britain and New Zealand is right by Australia. Therefore, they respectively have incredibly similar forms of English, even more so at base level. The article that I got this chart from is entitled Comparison of American and British English. As I said, people often zone in on the first 2. Heck, whenever I write on Google Docs, if I spell the adjectival form of travel with 2 L's as opposed to 1 L, they ask me if I want to switch over to British English. More on that later. I think the inclusion of Canada and Australia are to show that they aren't completely respectively like American and British English. There are some differences as opposed to why Ireland and New Zealand are not on this list. Australian English, like most other forms of English, is closer to British English for obvious reasons. Canadian English is closer to American English and they are often grouped together as North American English. Although Canadian English has uniquely Canadian and even some British conventions of spelling, being that Canada is right above the United States, them being grouped together isn't that hard to imagine. They're already grouped together for a lot of reasons, like when movies are made or things are sold online. The US and Canada are grouped together as the domestic market. Side note, I live in Metro Detroit, which is the biggest metro area on the US-Canada border. If you drive around here, you will see some Canadian flags underneath the US and Michigan flags. Anyways, actually looking at this chart, you can tell off the bat that American English is the most different from everyone else. I think y'all know the reason for that. The same reason we drive on the right side of the road and the same reason we put the month before the day. Australia. Anyways, this chart is like a perfect summary of everything I just said and a bit more. We don't spell words like color or flavor with the letter U. We actually use our Z's when spelling words like realize and analyze, although seeing that the British sometimes spell with the letter Z is kind of funny. I don't know why. Words like offense and defense, we use the letter S and everyone else uses C. Defense with a C to me looks like you're taking down a fence as opposed to defending something. Now this one is interesting because when I was little, I was told that gray with an E is the color and gray with an A is the emotion, although I spelled it with an A universally my whole life. When you feel gray, you often envision the color gray, as in thunderclouds. Now this one shocks me because when it comes to other words, like the adjective/past participle versions of travel and cancel, which I'll talk more about in a second, the correct American thing to do is knock off one of the L's while everyone else keeps it. But the word fulfill, we actually keep the second L. Canada is either or and the others only use one. The word aging, everybody in the US gets taught this in school. Drop the E and add ing. If you keep the E, there's a good chance you're still in preschool. Or, apparently, one of these guys. Now some words are way more loose across borders from what I've noticed, like traveled and canceled and center and theater. Notice how I use 2 L's as opposed to 1 L even though 1 L is the American way to do it? And I'm not the only American that does this. When I was younger, I was taught to double the final consonant and then add ed or ing for past tense words like that. And that's why every time I look at a word like that without 2 L's, it just looks wrong to me. Except for modeling. Modeling with 2 L's looks like modeling. And then when it comes to center and theater, like I said, I spelled theater with the R and E swapped when I was younger, and there are plenty of centers, theaters, and other places in America where those words end in RE. I think what further proves my point about the lines being blurred about the correct way to spell the words, I had a convo with my Aussie friend Carl, who's like the coolest person in the whole of Australia, don't at me, about Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse, and how triggered I was that it was getting delayed. He responded, certainly better than it being cancelled though, right? And used 1 L. And I responded, if it ever got cancelled, everybody rioting. I, an American, spelled it the non-American way. And Carl, a non-American, spelled it the American way. Like, I think it's safe to say that some words, it doesn't really matter how you spell it because everyone does it their own way regardless of the rules. Now, if I ever saw somebody in the US spell realize with an S, I would have some questions to say the least. Like, Do you realize what you're doing, man? The only case here where Britain/Ireland is different from everybody else is program. Everyone else spells program the same way, but when it comes to events like concerts or TV shows, the UK and Ireland add ME for some reason I don't quite know. Speaking of programs, here we come to the controversial section of the video. Dialectal dubs should not exist. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, if there's a cartoon made in the United States or otherwise, there shouldn't be a UK dub or an Aussie dub or vice versa. It's unnecessary because we all speak the same language. Now, I imagine some of y'all heard that and are thinking, what the heck? What's wrong with having different dialects in media like cartoons? Hear me out. When I was little, I watched Peppa Pig. Like, who didn't? Very obviously a British show with British characters. The show aired on Nick Jr. and I never once thought, wow, that's weird. They're speaking with a funny voice. I just thought that like everyone else around me, some people speak a little differently, and that's perfectly fine. Then I got older and learned there was an American dub.
I'm Peppa Pig. This is my little brother George. This is Mommy Pig. And this is Daddy Pig. Peppa Pig.
Oh my lord, this sounds so wrong. Why does this exist? Keep the pigs British. One of my European friends from earlier told me that, apparently, parents were getting upset with the show because it was making their kids talk with a British accent.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin'
kids British.
At first I thought it was an overreaction, but then I remembered that my buddy Marius told me that he spoke with an American accent for a while, and that his mom stopped him from consuming American media for a time, and he basically had to teach himself how to speak with a British accent. I still think it's an overreaction though, and I'm glad the dubbing isn't nearly as widespread as the original version. Keep the pigs British. And the same thing goes for Bluey. Keep the dogs Australian. Now, those of you that watch Bluey may be asking yourself, what are you talking about? The dogs are Australian. Yeah, well, Disney tried to get rid of that, but the Bluey team doubled down on having the accents, and I'm so glad that they did. I'm about to rant, by the way, so fair warning. I find it a little ironic that the inclusive and diverse Disney would get rid of Australian accents on a show that literally has an overarching theme of Australian humor and culture! The show is set in Brisbane, by the way, which is the capital of Queensland, Australia. Why would you want to get rid of the accents? Remember what I said earlier about American English dominating, especially because of entertainment? How many American cartoons and shows in general are globally known? A lot. And even if these shows are not based in America, the fact that they're created and produced in America means that there's gonna be some semblance of American humor and culture. So I think it's safe to say that the world is well adjusted / used to American culture even if they've never been to the States. To have an Australian cartoon that has Aussie culture and humor as one of the most important aspects of it makes it automatically distinct in my opinion, especially because most people don't know that much about Australian culture. Heck, we never once talked about Australia, or New Zealand / Oceania for that matter, during geography or world history in the 13 to 14 years I was locked in the school system, but that's a video for another time. I would go as far as saying that the display of Australian culture and humor is the most important aspect of Bluey, because it's a primary reason why it's set apart from other sitcoms and preschool shows in general. Of course, the people of Australia are used to it, but again, most people outside of Australia don't know that much about the culture, especially when compared to American or even British culture. Anyways, I'm saying all that to say, Disney wanting the Aussie accents gone is an incredibly, frankly stupid idea, and I'm so glad that Ludo Studio doubled down and basically said, screw all that.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
As if Disney hasn't screwed with the show enough.
How does the baby get in the lady's belly?
But again, video for another time if I ever get to it. Speaking of Bluey, I remember when I was searching on Wikipedia and learned that Robert Irwin had a cameo as the character Alfie. That's where I also learned that SpongeBob 2 had an Aussie dub and he was in it as the seagull Kyle, which reminded me that a long time ago, I'm pretty sure that the UK dub of SpongeBob 2 was broadcast on Nick here in the US, or at least some alt version than what I got because the seagull sounded different. Anyways, in conclusion to this section, dialect dubbing shouldn't exist as it's incredibly unnecessary. For those that don't know, aside from music, I'm an aspiring artist and animator, although currently not the best. And my main project is something that I'm very passionate about entitled Cubo's World. I want to have people with different dialects of English speaking all throughout the show because I think it could be a teaching moment for kids that some people say, spell, and even call words differently from each other. Which is why I'm so adamant about dialectal dubs not being a thing. Even with everyone speaking the same language, there's still a sense of awe in knowing that we have our differences, but that's what makes us unique. To me, at least. I want to visit all these countries at some point. Whether it's before, during, or after I finally get Cubo's World up and running, I don't know. All I'm saying is I think that different dialects are pretty cool, and it's always great meeting someone who speaks the same language as you, but in a different dialect. Gives you a new perspective on the very language you speak, which is both mind-blowing and awesome. So until next time, thanks for watching. I love you all. Hug somebody today. Bye.